Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of our host, Dr. E. Emotional algebra with Dr. E.
Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. It's a podcast to help us all become better people through understanding the different variables that drive our behaviors and interactions with others. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E, before we even get into this episode, congratulations on the big win. Everyone can see what you're wearing today. This is not coincidental.
No, it's not coincidental, but I am keeping it low key. It's all part of the brand. When they say when you lose, say little, when you win, say less. So, and I might not be able to say as much today just because my throat is still recovering from being a loud screaming fan last night.
You were screaming your head off at the game. You were at the national championship game.
I was at the national championship game. Yes, had a great time. Nephews came in and saw some friends hadn't seen in a while. It's always a good reason to get together with people.
That is exciting. And you are a graduate of Ohio State, so this is especially meaningful for you. How many national championships have they won? Pop quiz.
Well, 9, while some will say that it's not that many because they were splitter things. So they had a discussion on I think, game day yesterday about how the university claims to have so many, and others would say 7. So, but either way.
How did this rank for you? Was this satisfying? Where does it rank among the other championships you've witnessed?
Well, there've just been so many.
You already broke the little.
Oh my gosh, I did. Yeah. I was there in 2003. I was there in 2015. I was there in 2008 when they lost to LSU. So I've been there for a few of them. So, but this one was fun to be there with. It was the best thing. It was in Atlanta, so having it right downtown, right down the road, 40 minutes or so. That was really nice to have that.
Sure, right in your backyard.
Yep, absolutely. So no flights back today. Got to sleep in my own bed and all that stuff, and wake up and get ready for the podcast today.
Terrific. Well, congratulations again. We are recording this on a Tuesday, so I guess it's Victory Tuesday for you and everyone from Ohio State or who went to Ohio State, especially the players. Congrats to them. And we are back on this Tuesday with a brand spanking new episode of Emotional Algebra.
We are.
Did you see what I did there? Brand spanking new, because subtle
brand.
It's a subtle allusion to what we're going to be talking about today, which we've talked about previously.
Absolutely. And it's kind of fitting. It's after the game, since, you have two powerhouse brands. College football teams played in the game last night. We look at how they've represented their brand, and how that's come across over the years. Definitely in that brand, there's been slip ups here and there with here and there. However, they both Ohio State and Notre Dame, I think they come from a place of a mutual respect for each other. There was a lot of really good positive exchanges between the fans and the crowds. Wherever I went, they found the Notre Dame fans very respectful before the game and through the game, and always try to carry myself that way as well with fans, because we're all in it together. It's a fun experience. I think we got to be careful when people take things too seriously and personally, like we talked about before. So if we go back to our Rivalries episode, we talked about how some of the fans behaved after that Michigan loss, and really how we want to be aware of how are we treating people in these situations. So, and even as we're talking about our brand and our personal brand, so what we wanted to do today was just review the slide quickly, and we'll bring in our awesome guest today, who I've worked with for years as part of my brand management and PR and stuff over the years.
That's right. Back with a brand new guest today as well, who we're excited to have with us.
Was that a play? On
one
that
more
word
time,
again?
Dr. E. Maybe I'll do it even a third time.
Third time's a charm.
So we wanted to just talk about some of the things we discussed the first time we did this episode, an episode on personal branding. So the audience, if they missed that episode, can kind of get up to speed on what we were talking about then. So here
Right,
we go,
right.
Doctor.
Yep. So in this, I think some of the topics we want to look at are we talked about were brand association, or your thoughts, feelings, and attitudes that people associate with your name. Brand identity, how do you want the world to see? And remember, the reason we did this was really about personal branding. While we brought in that episode discussions about more corporate brands and some of the individuals and stuff we see in the world around us, this, I think as just an individual, we want to look at that in terms of how we presenting ourselves in our day-to-day life, in our social media, in our jobs. And that's, again, you'll see in one of our discussions why we're tying it to also what you carry to the office too. Your brand promise, what do you promise to deliver, is another piece. Brand consistency, how consistent are you in your actions? Just to tie back to the game. So, Ohio State was seen as a very Christian, very kind of spiritually connected team. And this past season, there was a situation where Jack Sawyer, after one of the games or Tennessee, he got a little excited about, I think, after the game, and he didn't treat some of the fans with respect. It kind of behaved a little bit disrespectfully. In terms of brand consistency, that didn't fit with him. If you've seen the way that he's carried himself, since then, maybe the coach talked to him, and maybe he also looked at himself and monitored his own behavior. But these are things that we want to look at, that when we're not inconsistent with our brand across situations, people are often going to reduce you to the lowest behavior. They're going to feel like the times that you're looking exceptional are exceptions to how you really might be behind the curtain, behind the screen when the camera's off. So I think that's where brand consistency is about, really looking at the next piece, which is brand integrity. Do you deliver on your promise, and are you consistent with your identity? And then, we talk about in hierarchical models about how does your real, feel, and ideal self play into this. So the more consistent you are with your ideal, or what you're often trying to present, your real, which is how you're really seen, and the feel, which is how you feel inside, the easier it is going to be to maintain a consistent brand behavior and have that brand recognition that we're trying to do. The goal behind all this was really to help people live by those three words that I teach, which are truth, honor, and integrity. And even again, yesterday during the game, there were some fans misbehaving here and there, and treating a Notre Dame fan less than respectfully. And I was like, dudes, literally, I just said, dudes, we're all in this together. Treat each other with respect, because to me, it's just not what the game's about. Games aren't about behaviors that we often see people engage in. That, to me, I think, again, we just want to recognize that we are in this as a group, and that we are in this together.
Right. And, one thing I think we talked about in the last episode that's important for people to keep in mind when they're looking at that, those sort of 5 pillars you have there of personal branding, is that the term brand doesn't just apply to a big company or something that is associated with a product. It really does apply to every single person in their everyday life. And that is something you really need to be mindful of. I think as we're going to discuss later in this episode, some of the examples we bring up, but just especially today with social media and everything, that is something that I think everyone needs to be cognizant of.
Yeah. And it's not just about a situation to me, I better watch myself. It's about, how am I carrying myself to others, to myself, to the world, to my family? And again, that's why I think talking about those different, as you said, pillars of personal brand management, I think is so critical. So with that, let's go ahead and welcome in our awesome guest. I'll turn it over to you, Andrew, to introduce Wendy.
Absolutely. So we have with us today Wendy Guarisco. Wendy is former director of booking at CNN, and she is the founder of the Guarisco Group, a PR firm that works with many clients. And she goes way back. She actually began her career at McCann Erickson, which at the time was one of maybe the world's largest advertising agency. So welcome to Emotional Algebra, Wendy. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Yep.
I knew I had to bring in somebody who'd be able to deliver. So that's Wendy, always. Wendy's really, again, perfect person to represent brand management, the way she carries herself, the respect that she has, the reputation that she has. And again, it's great to be working with her directly and helping her promote what she does and share what she does, because she always helped me to look good. Now it's my chance to help her to look like a star.
Able to earn now. It's unusual time.
Well, I think that may be a good place to start. Wendy, you have so much experience in this space in terms of advising people on their personal brands, especially people who are more in the public eye as well, not just everyday folks. Maybe you do some everyday folks as well. But let's talk about that. Maybe just give some people some background on the types of clients you worked with. And I know that there's one client that you worked with, an author who had an especially positive outcome with some things that you had advised. So let's just hear a little bit about that.
Sure. So the first thing we do with clients is media training, because even people who are great communicators in person, it's a whole different skill set to hone that down to be able to be a great communicator in a 3 to 5 minute interview. So the first step is helping a client define their brand. And a lot of times people don't realize they even have a brand. So we say, your brand is what you want to be known for, and then your messaging is what supports that. So I think it's important to draw on a client's full background, not just as Dr. E says, you're more than just a name. We always say you're more than just your job title. So when we were booking Dr. E, we would pitch his thoughts not only as a leader in mental health and things like that, but also as a father, as a philanthropist, as all the things in his life, a Buckeyes fan. All of those things come together to give a complete picture of your brand.
So tell us a little bit about the situation with your client that you had.
So we had a client come to us. He was a pastor. He had churches in New Orleans and Houston, and he had written a book about fathers and daughters, and he wanted, obviously, to promote the book. So in our first media training session, we helped him, craft sound bites about the book and everything, but we also taught him how to answer not only as a father, but as a pastor, as a community leader, as, all the different aspects of him. And what we found is that fit right into the news cycle. This was right at the time of the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, Missouri. And police and communities were just really at a bad time. And just in passing, he happened to mention that he was asking law enforcement to come speak at his church to make inroads with the community. And well, that's a great news hook. So I'm here to talk about that. And suddenly he was on not only national news, but international news talking about that. And shortly thereafter, we had the shooting in the church in Charleston. And again, he was literally everywhere. What do you say to your parishioners who are afraid maybe to come to church now? What if you see somebody that doesn't look like you in church? What do you do? So it really rounded out his whole brand, and we got to showcase it around the world. It was fabulous. And at the end of our engagement, he said that the lessons he learned from that, he was going to take forward in his speaking engagements, in his sermons for church, and all the things he does. So it's a valuable thing to really draw on all aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the two of you talk about personal brand and the aspects of it. I think that most people do not consider these things. Dr. E, even that people have a personal brand, and Wendy, that just how dynamic a personal brand can be, that you're really pulling in all facets of your personality, of your being. That's interesting. I'll tell you, I don't think about that myself. So it's good to hear you both mention that. And it's good to hear about that outcome.
Well, like for Dr. E, if he's booked to talk about, God forbid, a school shooting, it's interesting to hear that he's an expert in mental health and what could have caused this and all that stuff. But to know that he's a parent too, like that really
Mm-hmm.
comes out the insights, and it
Yeah,
really.
Right. And
absolutely.
that's important in I guess having some credibility with an audience, because when you're thinking about how they present on to a TV audience, I think in many cases. So yeah, all important.
Yeah.
And even some of the anchors, I think a lot of times anchors don't talk about their person, and that's not necessarily the role, but it's Sandy Hook. When I was, on CNN, HLN, and all that, you'd go to breaks, and those anchors would just be in tears, and you'd come back, and you could see some eyes that seemed to be wet. But I think the feeling was is they had to keep it together, and I think sometimes it would send even a strong message to say, "This is hitting home with me. I know I'm here to report the news, and I am also a parent, and this hits me at my heart and soul." So I wish that, and I think you're seeing that more with anchors when you look at some of the discussions and host chats and things that you see more now, so as well. But even back then during that news cycle, I felt like there were some of the anchors I was working with that are holding back a little bit again, you want to be able to present the news, and also I think we're still human too.
Absolutely. And if their brand is authenticity and trustworthiness and those things, I think that relatability really adds to that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, I'm wondering, as we move along here, how social media figures into all of this. The example you gave, Wendy, was about 10 years ago. Social media was emerging at that point for sure, and was impactful, but maybe not quite what it is today. Today, social media is, I mean, in some ways, almost replacing the traditional media.
Mm-hmm.
And that can have its pitfalls, not just for people who are in the public eye, but people who are not in the public eye. They can suddenly find themselves in the public eye,
Right.
as one of the examples we'll talk about. But before we get to that, just is this something too that you're talking about with clients, discussing real, I guess maybe even giving just basic social media training?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be the same person online as you are on camera, as you are, at a football game. I mean, you have to be the same person. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
important. I think kids are finding this out too when they go for a job interview and they say, "I'm so great, I'm so professional," and then their social media has them blacked out at the bar. It's not a good look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about is a recent news story about a football game, actually, Wendy, and that is at the NFC wildcard round game between the Green Bay Packers and Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. And a Philadelphia Eagles fan was caught on video just absolutely berating a woman Packers fan, a woman who's happened to be a Packers fan, and just saying terrible, vile things. Her boyfriend or fiance caught it on video, posted on Twitter, and then things quickly spiraled downhill for him at that point. People outed who he was, because obviously no one knew who he was. But people recognized him in the video, figured out who he was, where he worked, and then he actually got fired by his company within, I would say, 2 days, I think it was.
Because of the impact on the company's brand. We can have people that do this working here. And
Exactly, right? So it's not just your personal brand that you need to worry about. It's also any organizations you may be connected to, whether that's your employer, whether that's maybe even somebody you volunteer for, or maybe hold some sort of board seat for.
Mm-hmm. Your
Yeah.
kid, you're, acting like that at a kid's soccer game. How does your kids and his teammates? It's,
Do you think that there should be any boundaries that, like here he lost a job? I'm not saying he should or shouldn't, but I think it's a good discussion to have or look at is, do you think that something like that in that moment, that might have been a 1% situation, that he might have drank too much and got pinged, and maybe some other's fan, a Packers fan or other fan, berated him or what? Do you think that should cross over to that degree of having somebody's livelihood affected?
I think it's probably something that's on a case by case basis, but as an employer, if that was my employee, how do I go out into the marketplace and say I'm respectable, I'm a good person, but I employ people like this? You know, it's again, it's the whole picture, and it has to all be sung from the same sheet.
Yeah. Wendy, I wonder how you would advise. Let's say you had separately had each of them as a client. Let's say you had the guy who was seen in the video who ended up being fired. Let's say he was just your client, just happened to be your client, and something like that happened. How would you? What sort of crisis, a strategy would you advise him on there?
Well, I think in any crisis strategy, you've got to come out with the truth first. If you don't tell your story, somebody else will. So I think they have to come out with the truth, say how sorry he is. That's not who I am. Here's what I'm doing to fix it. I'm going to volunteer with, whatever I'm going to volunteer with, all those things. And same for the company. this is behavior we can't tolerate. And so we've immediately dismissed this person because behavior like that is not who we are. So I think it's really important to come out and be authentic and real and get everybody to the narrative.
And one thing I was struck by, which both of you said, is just about being consistent with your brand, your personal brand, right? And so for this guy, my thought is probably, I don't know the guy, obviously we don't know him, but probably was very inconsistent with his personal brand. Like, I doubt that he acts that way at work, right? Otherwise he would have been fired long ago. So this was way out of his probably normal behavior. So I think the point is that you need to be cognizant of that in all scenarios, even at a game where, hey, maybe you're drinking a little too much and getting to a little going overboard, right?
And maybe that's the spin for him too. That was my worst day. That's not who I am. None of us would want to be judged by our worst day. So, give me a chance to make this right.
Right. And I think that, again, the whole thing is if we all took that approach to, again, treat people with truth, honor, and integrity, these discussions would be in the past. It just wouldn't happen. So always think how you'd want to treat people on your best day, not your worst, is kind of the way that I look at things. And like I said, we are all human. We all have emotions. We all have our struggles and issues, and we're all in this together.
Exactly.
And don't you think, though, that at this point in time, it's more important than ever to maintain that consistency, or to maintain the truth, honor, and integrity that Doctor, you just mentioned, because of the fact that you could be on camera. Maybe you don't even know you're on camera. 20, 25 years ago, no one apart from the people in that little section or a couple of rows of seats would have known about this. And now literally the whole country, if not even outside of the country, people knew about it and were talking about it, and it had serious repercussions for his life.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Okay. Well, that's an interesting one. Wendy, thanks for your analysis on it. And always good to hear it from people who are experts in this matter. The next thing we wanted to talk about, Dr. E, you and I were discussing the Netflix documentary on Jerry Springer. I believe it's called Fights, Camera, Action, which is a pretty clever name. We were struck by, I think all three of us here are old enough, but Dr. E, you and I certainly were struck by how that show came together. It's been a while since I even thought about the Jerry Springer show. I certainly watched it back in the day when it was on TV in its earlier days. But you were bringing up too Springer's personal brand and sort of how he allowed others to dictate his brand in some ways, or maybe he didn't maybe it wasn't so explicitly dictated, but that was sort of the net result, is that he sort of just went along with things no matter how questionable they may have been morally. And
So what's your awareness of Jerry Springer, Wendy, from maybe knowing the show, or like I think you said you had worked with somebody who worked with him on air?
That I worked with was his co-anchor at a local news station, and she said he was absolutely lovely and the nicest guy, and would never, she was shocked that this is who he had become. But I guess if you look at it, he didn't cheer them on. when they'd break out in fights, he didn't get in the middle of it. He just kind of was like shocked like the rest of us. And maybe that was sticking to his brand. I don't know.
Well, I think at that level, though, again, even the people around you, like we're talking about, the people around you are representatives of your brand, your friends, your family, you know, even these days, who you vote for becomes a representation of your brand. So even in that, you have to look at, here's a guy who's, to me, media savvy. Here's a guy who was on the news. He was a politician. I mean, politicians, they understand the ins and outs of this. So at what level does somebody compromise how they would treat others to let things like that happen? It, to me, it looked like, I don't know if if it became about the Benjamins, you know, or if he just let other people just, you know, like we said, dictate the actions going on around him. But to me, there's a huge level of cognitive dissonance in that I could be this nice guy that wants to be so likable. But then even in the show, when he was asked about the person who was the guest who was murdered by the husband and how viciously that person was murdered, and he just kind of dismissed it. He dismissed the whole issue.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I just found that incredibly insensitive. So I would still wonder, even though people saw him as so nice, what goes on inside. So again, our brand, and that's why I talk about, now you do too, we talk about brand integrity. It should be who you are, not how you behave in this situation or this situation or this situation. And I think that's what so many people see when we look at TikToks or Facebook or all these people that are on social media. They do try to present one side, and people will present a more sensationalistic side of themselves to try to get the clicks. And then you start to lose yourself in that. So how do you, when you're working with clients, and some of them may have become pretty prominent, is there ever a time that you check them or would get in that situation, say, you know, I remember when you came to me, this is what I really appreciated about you, and I feel like you might be getting a little adrift of that. Is that something that you're aware of or follow?
Fortunately, I haven't really had to do that as much. Imagine a situation where maybe a client is in a debate situation and they kind of lose it and get a little more aggressive than they usually would. Fortunately, that has not happened with any of our I could see that happening for sure. Get very heated about sports, about everything. You can lose
And I think that's the thing. Again, we want to understand that we all experience emotions. And when people understand that algebra, why does somebody get heated? Well, you know, anger protects when we feel threatened. Rage protects us when we feel in fear of our life or integrity feels threatened. So if people could go into the situation of saying even, you know, this really triggers me or pings me. I know trigger is even a trigger word these days for people, but you know, this pings me because this ties back to this. And yes, I'm feeling a little heated right now because this is important to me, rather than just firing back. But so many news shows seem to even want to have that gotcha moment. And that's what his show even became, you know, well known for, the gotcha moment. And the lady who went on there, who was murdered, and her son said she didn't know what she was getting into. And then he said, well, maybe she did in some ways. But I think we just have to look at those situations and ask ourselves in advance, what are we doing here? And what are we here? Why are we here?
Exactly. And the shocking thing to me was the lack of aftercare, that they wouldn't even pay for your trip home if you walked off the set.
Yeah. That was shocking, Wendy. Another thing too, just thinking about personal brand, and we're also going way back, that you're talking about 25 years ago, maybe more in some cases. The guests who were appearing on that show were not thinking about their personal brand. It was clear that concept maybe had never even been introduced to them, or it was completely foreign to them.
I want to be honest.
So I think that's sad that there wasn't a little bit of savvy there on some of the. Maybe there was. Who knows? Maybe some people went on there as a goof or to get some exposure or something. But I feel like you're saying, a lot of people got in there, showed up earnestly to talk about their problems and try to fix their problems, and the show clearly was not there to do that.
Yeah, and I couldn't watch the show because for me, it was endorsing it. It was endorsing the behavior. So I never watched the show. I found it interesting at the end of the documentary, the producer that was on there said, "Hey, you guys are watching this documentary even now. Netflix is making money off of this. Jerry Springer made millions and millions, his producers did, and everybody else, even the producers underneath that, you hear, who had to keep churning these stories, they were even treated horrifically through that and left with nothing. And the one guy who was on cocaine and alcohol and all those things and just had to leave."
Doing that every day to people.
Yeah, I think, Dr. E, I think that producer you're talking about, if I remember correctly, his father worked for SNL. Do you remember that detail?
Yes.
And he talked about his father sort of mocking him, saying, "You're not doing real TV over there, Jerry Springer." And that actually shocked me a little bit. Sure, SNL is one of the most storied, shows in television history. It's the pinnacle, at least for entertainment. But to say that to your son, that's a pretty harsh thing to say. When the TV landscape had changed dramatically, his father likely started working there in the mid 70s or 80s. Television was very different than it was when Springer started its rise. So I was startled by that, many things, and I mean that might be another thing to discuss between the two of you. How much is your personal brand intertwined with how you're raised and how you're nurtured by your parents or not nurtured?
I think that's a great point. What do you think, Wendy?
Well, I'm trying to think. I don't have a good answer for that. That seems like a Dr. E question to me.
Well, I think the reason I'm thinking of you is now your daughter's working with you, and now a partner in your business, and obviously she represents you well, and again, you obviously raised a very respectful and professional young woman, and she's now killing it with you and doing the media training as well. So, I think it is a huge issue. And I think I really wish, and we don't know what happens behind some of those, closed doors and things, but I think as parents, is it incumbent on us to some degree, if we see our kids out in social media doing things that we feel cross a line, to say something? I'm of the feeling that I give guidance here and there. I'm not going to control the situation. I'm more, let's let life be the teacher, and life will bring the lessons with it. And we will have discussions along the way, and because again, you can't, the more sometimes you try to stop somebody from doing something, almost the more you're inviting them to do it, depending on that personality. So I say, give the guidance, have the discussions, give the direction. And I think to be quiet and not say anything can also, though, be as damaging as trying to control that narrative and telling them what to do, because now they're not getting direction. So even if your child is 30, 40 years old, 50 years old, whatever, and you see them doing things, I don't think it's a bad idea to still give them some feedback and say, "I love you. That's why I'm sharing this with you."
But Dr. E, what about, let's say, a teen, like a 15-year-old to 16-year-old to 17-year-old, sort of on the cusp of adulthood, but not there yet? I mean, I don't know. To me, I would want to step in if I knew something and shut that down, just because of the real world consequences and how far reaching they can be. I mean, a kid could really.
Yeah, if you're getting into issues where you're crossing legal boundaries and what you're showing or doing or behaving, or somebody out there who's showing drug or alcohol, I think those are things. Yeah, that's where you are getting to those lines. I think, though, when you're getting into some of the TikToks or things that people are doing, that kids and teens are doing, again, I give guidance and then point to that life is going to might teach some difficult lessons at times too. Because we have to look at temperament, and that temperament, when you get somebody who's pretty strong-willed, it can drive some pretty tough behavior. So then when it comes around and they come back and say, "Do you know this happened to me and this happened to me?" And I'm like, "Well, what did you do? Did you ask for it? No. But did you maybe behave in a way that sent that message, that put that idea out about your brand? Yes, you did. So now, like Wendy said, what are you going to do to repair it? What are you going to do to change the narrative and to change your future and to see these lessons that we might carry with us? Because again, cancel culture, it doesn't matter which aisle you stand on or where you live or what happens. Everybody wants to cancel. And I can't say everybody. A lot of people want to cancel people. And I think we just have to look at that idea of righteousness that gets into that. That's all about power. It's I have the power to take your power away and to destroy you. And that's just not going to build communities.
No.
And Wendy, what do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when my daughter was a teenager and she came and laid out her case for why she needed to be on social media, I said, fine, as long as I'm your friend and our priest is your friend, you can do whatever you want. And it kept her in line.
Good advice.
It, and Monsignor Dillon was going to see it. So
the Monsignor kept her in line.
Absolutely.
Did you find yourself having to step in at all, or no?
No, she was really good.
That's good.
Unless, the kids all have the Finstagram, which is their fake Instagram that their parents don't know about.
Right, the burner account. Yeah.
on the public one, she looked great. So.
And I guess for people listening or watching, Wendy, what do you think? Let's say somebody gets into a situation like the Eagles fan that we talked about, but even someone younger, they get into a very bad situation where that gets widely publicized. What's your advice? Like 2 things of advice on how to handle that. I know you sort of said for that guy to immediately apologize and get in front of that aspect. What else after that?
Just don't make excuses. Own up to it and say how you're going to make it better. And, hopefully you move on after that.
Yeah. And then Dr. E, what do you think about, let's say that guy, he's going to be looking for a job. How does he address that in a job interview? Because he's going to have to address his abrupt end to his work. There's a good chance whoever's interviewing him saw the video.
I think it's just same as Wendy. Just be honest up front and say, hey, this is not how I want to represent myself. I never really thought about the way that I treated others before. This is a life lesson, and this is something I'm going to take with me. And, these are the corrective actions I'm taking. I realize I have to be careful of how I carry myself. I have to be careful of who I surround myself with. I have to be careful of how I get carried away in certain situations that are highly emotional. I am a rabid Eagles fan, and because of that, I used to feel like this behavior was okay, and to me, it's not. And I mean, a lot of sports games, again, like I said last night, seeing some people, behaving badly. For the most part, it didn't happen, And for those, I think again, for the people around in the crowd to be able to say, "Hey, that's not cool, man. This is a game. We're here to enjoy this together. Don't make this sporting event give you the excuse to try to cause pain and harm to other people because you're hurting somewhere inside." And that's what I would say is people who hurt people hurt people. So when we understand where our hurts come from and we try to take care of those and heal those hurts, and as we do that, then how are we then going to then propagate a better world so that we're not hurt as much, and so we're not spreading that hurt around? And I think that to me is just something I'd love to see. Will it maybe get as many clicks? Probably not. That's a good thing. Maybe we don't need to be cashing in on the clicks. Maybe we need to be cashing in on our personal integrity, on our behavior, on the way we treat others. To me, that's the cash that's king, is the cash where we're building communities and we're building stronger bonds and friendships. And I had guys behind me last night after every play in the first series, the Notre Dame fan behind me would go, and he kept doing that through the whole series. And the guy next to him was his friend, his buddy of him. I was talking with him. So I said, dude, after we get a big play, can I do that too? And I kind of laughed about it. And then when we started winning, I was giving his friend, his buddy a high five. He's like, don't be and said something. I'm like, dude, I'm just cheering the game with you. We're all on this together. And his friend even said, Yeah, don't worry about it. He gets into the game. I said, that's cool. You know, by the end of the game, we were shaking hands, we're friends, we're talking, and that's the way I wanted to keep it. You know, is we're in this together. We can joke around and we can all have a good time, winning or losing. It's the journey. You know, that game is one stop on a long journey, whether we won or lost, and for them too.
Dr. E, you brought up something there that I just want to back up to, and that is the fact that he may have been a rabid Eagles fan. Now, Eagles fans have a notorious reputation for bad behavior at home games, right? They famously pelted Santa Claus with snowballs years ago. Behavior's often bad. They boo like crazy, not just the opponent, but the home team when they're not happy. Is there, and I want to hear from you on this, Wendy, too. Is there any is there any efficacy in leaning on that at all in this situation for that guy? If he was in a job interview, could he say, what, you know, is there any value to saying, well, I got caught up in that Eagles fan mentality?
Yeah, I think
blame others.
No, well, it's accountability. It's saying, hey, I recognize the power I've given to others to influence and affect my behavior, and that cannot be the way I carry myself forward. There's a sense of entitlement, and there's a sense of depersonalization that in social settings, often people's behaviors deteriorate when they have cues from other people around them in a crowd that has led to really horrific behaviors. You know, so what we have to understand is I learned a social psychology lesson, and I felt entitled to behave this way. And as we talked about entitlement, it comes from two angles. And some people, often entitlement is about trying to seize power in a situation because I deserve it, because I should be able to, because other people did that, other people have that. And that to me that lacks integrity. It lacks a sense of honor, especially when it comes at other people's expense. So if he can say, yes, for years, these are the games I attended, and we all have those times, and now this situation brought that home to me. I want to be a better person for myself. I want to be a better person for my family. I see the secondary and tertiary implications of my behaviors, which are things that I hadn't thought about before. And because of that, you know, it may be what he does. He says, I am producing a public service announcement, and maybe he puts that out. Maybe he becomes the face for Philadelphia Eagles, and he approaches the Eagles and said, you know, I was this guy. And maybe they play that before a game to say, hey, fans, treat each other respectfully. That's a great way to spin it, a great way to put a positive message out there, and eat some humble pie. And maybe he comes on there with a piece of pie, you know, and he's eating humble pie, you know. I mean, you think of ways to spin it positively. So I think sometimes the best way is to take personal accountability. And then beyond that, then you can kind of make light of yourself, yet not making light of the situation, to say, this is a serious situation. Do I make light of the humble pie? Yes. Wow. We are all in this together, people. This game is going to end, and we're going to go home, and we're going back to our lives. And even while we're here, we're living. And as long as we think that we can demean and diminish people, then we're not standing in our truth, and we're not building communities. Because the NFL is a community. College football is a community. A university is a community. Our countries are a community. And I hope and pray that in the next 4 years and beyond, we continue to build a national community that brings us together, not one that excludes us, because we all live in this same country, and beyond that, in the same world. And that is a brand I think we want to manage more strongly than any other brand that exists around us.
Okay, Dr. E, what you just said there is really interesting about sort of using him to then become the poster boy for that sort of behavior, and why not to do it. But one thing I need to add is, in addition to losing his job, the Eagles did ban him from gave him a lifetime ban from ever attending a game. So on the one hand, he's never going to find himself in that situation if he gets carried away again, where he ends up berating a fan. But it sounds to me like you're saying there might be something in it for the Eagles to even show some grace and forgive this guy after some period and try to use him. And that's what I want to get to you, Wendy. What do you think about that idea from the Eagles standpoint? Let's say they were your client. Mm-hmm. Would that be good to try to, use him as an example of why you don't want to behave like that at the game?
I think they'd have to let some time go by first. I don't think it's something you could do right away. But I also think if Dr. E wants to be a publicist, like, we would take you in a heartbeat, because that was so good. The way you
That was good. Yeah.
Well, I was trained by the best, so I often try to think of ways, how can I make this work? And it's not just making work to the benefit, but it is something that, to me, if you don't believe it, don't say it. Because sooner or later it's going to come through. And that's why I think people really have to be careful of what they put out there, because is it going to stand the test of time? Is it going to hold up under even stress? Because it's not just about how you can be when life is good. It's how you can be in every time in your life. And that's where we talked about in our talk with Andrea Tate, who wrote the article about canceling Thanksgiving and Christmas, and because of what happened in the election. And we had a great discussion with her, and her article that she wrote got millions and millions of hits and a lot of hate mail. A lot of people had a lot to say about that, and she didn't count on that. But but for her, it's like, I needed to be fair to myself. I needed to be true to myself in this, and she stood behind it. And she took care of herself, and she explained to people why. And it wasn't an excommunication of her family and the people around her that she said, I just needed to take care of myself and didn't want to put myself in situations that I felt might expose me to stress. And I brought up that was a grieving process. And we need time to grieve. So just with this whole situation, I think what Andrew's saying, what you're saying, we need time to process situations before we could bring somebody like that back, but I think this guy hopefully is evaluating himself. And I hope other fans are also taking a look, not so that they don't get caught, but you fall into another situation of a cancel culture. The Eagles canceled this guy. They banned him for life. And you can say, yes, there are some things that are just beyond the pale. And I didn't hear what he said. I never saw it or heard it. Andrew and I discussed it.
But it was bad.
Yeah. So I think, we have to look at that and still, do we give people the opportunity for atonement? Because what I say about atonement is, when we feel guilt, we often push ourselves away from each other. It separates us. So as long as we hold on to guilt, we keep that separateness, because guilt tells us when we've done something to somebody else that we need to fix. Shame tells us when we've done something to ourselves we need to fix. So I say, when people feel guilt, they are always going to feel shame. They're also going to feel failure, because failure tells us when it's time to learn. So in that idea of atonement is often we want to atone to others and to ourselves so we can love ourselves again. That's the biggest thing that happens. Is the biggest thing we do to ourselves is we stop believing we're worthy of love, and then we stop loving others when we do things or we feel we behaved in a way that wasn't loving towards them. So if you take the word atone and you break it into two words, what I love about looking at words in the language is it becomes at one. So when I atone for my sins or my errors in self or my behaviors, I find more at one-ment within myself and then with my relationships to others. But when we use guilt as a weapon and shame as a weapon, and our culture hierarchically does that, starting in our families, going through our educations, into our marriages, our jobs, all those situations, and now into our culture, we have to look at, what are we doing? Are we contributing to the healings of others? Are we as a team holding up our brand by excommunicating people? And haven't the egos been complicit in allowing that behavior? And now they're trying to cancel one guy because it'll make them look better as a brand? Forget about it. Stand up, Eagles, and teach your fans how to behave better. Get those public service announcements out there, and people say, oh, you're no fun. You don't want people to have fun at games. No, I want people to have fun at games. I want them to enjoy their circumstances in life. I want them to enjoy these activities. Yes, last night at the game, I had an expletive come out of my mouth. It wasn't, and I turned around to the guy behind me whose son was there, and I said, "I'm sorry." I apologized to him and his son. And at the end of the game, when his son was in tears, I said, "Brother, always know this is just a day in the rest of your life, and always be a fan and love your college, love your team, and keep rooting, and let this be a day that you live and you remember that you got to be there, and good job for you guys in getting here, and enjoy that process," because that's how I wanted him to see that situation. Because I don't know if he heard me swear or not, but I wanted to make sure that I atoned and that I was accountable for my behaviors, not because I want to just cover a mistake, but that's how I want to be. And that's what I think we all want to look at. And his dad just looked at me and he said, "Thank you," like that, and that's what we want to do in those situations.
Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, well said. And wow, you're putting the Eagles on notice. It sounds like that they.
I'm putting every team on notice because we know this isn't just Eagles,
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it might be. Let me tell you, I think that the Eagles fans, I'm an Eagles fan. I grew up an Eagles fan, so I can say this. They are a rare breed.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
they have the capacity. And I do think they've mellowed somewhat in the years because, the Phillies won a World Series in 2008. The Eagles won the Super Bowl 2018. So that mellowed them out because Philly was, for years. I mean, the Philadelphia Phillies, the baseball team, they're the losingest team in all of American professional sports. No one's lost more games than the Phillies. And that has an effect on the fans, I believe. But that's neither.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where we're talking about the emotions that go into rivalries, anger, rage, hatred, arrogance, flippancy, defiance, sarcasm. Those are those 7 protective emotions that I talk about. And they are all very demonstrated when people and teams lose, because we identify ourselves with those teams. We identify ourselves with our family. We identify ourselves with our country. We identify ourselves with our politics, our religions. And when they're winning, everything's great. When we feel like they're losing, then it's bad. And then that's where our hurts come out, because we feel less than because of our alignment with that brand. And if our brands demonstrated integrity, honest integrity, and promoted that more, and back that up with their behaviors, I think, again, we'd be working on changing a culture. We can't keep making excuses for things like that and why our brand fell apart or why we did the things we did. That just lacks integrity and lacks building trust with the next generations. Our behaviors now are affecting the generations behind us and their sense of entitlement to say, "Well, you behave this way, why can't I? You're telling me I can't do this anymore?" And that's what we want to really look at doing. And that's why, the Jerry Springers, really, they feel like he's helped create a culture of what we see on social media today. Is he was the first wave, possibly. And had he just said, "I'm not going to do a show like this," the guy knew he was making money. When you turn your back or you turn a blind eye to this because it suits your bank account, that's one thing I think that I always want to remember. And I would love somebody to call me out on that if I ever, get into a situation to make some income on what I'm doing.
I was just gonna say though, that is at its height. Once they started getting up there and challenging Oprah, he was pulling in 30 million a year just himself. That's that. Listen, I've never been offered that sum of money, but I might be able to be convinced to do some things I'm not, enthusiastic about. Let's say. What do you think about that, Wendy? How much does money play into decisions? I'm sorry. Say that again.
It's safe to say the producers weren't making that much, except for maybe the executive producer.
Right.
Right. Well, I think this has been
is that something you advise clients on, though, to consider? I'm just sort of wondering, like, how that money can influence the things they do, like in Springer's case, the type of show he put on, but also just how it influences the decisions they make with their career, or even how they present themselves once they get sort of that big payday.
I don't have a great answer for that.
That's all right.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion, and I appreciate you joining us, Wendy. It's always great to see you, and
Absolutely.
I get to
Yes.
see you
It
on
was
Great to have
here.
fun. Thank you.
great to have you on and provide some really interesting insight for us. So appreciate that, Wendy. You are the founder of the Guarisco Group, and what a career in television before that. So you really know the space. So it's good to hear from you and all that. Thanks for joining us today.
It was really fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Come back sometime.
Okay. Love to.
See you soon.
All right, Dr. E, what do you think?
I think again, it's a great follow up to our first episode with a star in the industry there.
Yeah, and I feel like this topic is always evolving. There's always going to be examples that people can learn from. I could see us doing another episode on this at some point.
I'd even throw it if there are anybody out there who had one of these mishaps like the Eagles dude who, I'd love to have somebody on here who's willing to talk about it and really get the backstory about what happened that put you in that situation. Where are you in your feel real and ideal self? Because that was an issue, where his real self probably didn't match up with his ideal, and because his feel probably got the best of him, and that it sounds like again as what he might have been saying to the fan was just absolute arrogance and an
It was
unleashing
beyond
of
that.
his
It
own.
was just vile stuff he was saying.
Yeah. Well, that's what drives that often is arrogance and entitlement and hatred. Remember, pushes us away from things that we don't want to feel. So once he's on top, how is he going to behave? And when they say when you lose, say little; when you win, say less. I try to hold to that as well. And just try to not say much that really disses other people, unless they're a friend of mine. We're joking back and forth, and we know it's humorous. That's why even in that situation yesterday, I had talked to these guys before the game, and we were joking around about the game, and also talking about our history, and and these guys were sharing some of the things they had to do after losses to Ohio State. So that's where, in some ways, I was amazed that this guy all of a sudden started turning his attitude. When we were friendly talking and joking around, but obviously he got pinged and some things came up, and that's okay. It's okay. We're good. And I think that's the thing. Like I said, it's just being able to talk it through.
Absolutely. A lot for people to think about, Dr. E. And don't stop thinking about this, because you can see the ramifications. They can come up quick on you. And
yeah. And as fans who want to see their teams win, they say don't stop believing, right?
I believe that was
So-
Journey.
It is absolutely, and that was what they played at the stadium last night near the end of the game. That it was a fan choice of the song they wanted to hear. So
course,
"Don't Stop
yeah.
Believing" came up, and we were all singing it as loud as we could. Hence, partly, that's all the other cheering and all that is why my voice sounds like it went through a gravel pit. But always good doing an episode with you, and until next time.
Listening to the wisdom of our host,